This was supposed to be a simple traffic ticket, until the defendant looked at the judge and said, "I'm the FBI director." Providence Municipal Court is not a place where history is supposed to happen. On most weekday mornings, it moves at a predictable rhythm. Shoes scuff against old tile floors. Paperwork slides across wooden counters worn smooth by decades of nervous hands. Clerks call out names that blur together. People worried about fines, points on licenses, missed payments, small mistakes. Nothing dramatic. Nothing special. This is where ordinary people come to answer for ordinary things. Power rarely shows up here. And when it does, it usually arrives quietly. That morning began the same way. Defendants filled the benches, some whispering to family members, others staring straight ahead, rehearsing explanations that probably wouldn't matter. A bailiff leaned against the wall, relaxed but attentive. Judge Jonathan Steele sat at the bench, calm as ever, moving through cases with patience and efficiency. One case ended. Another began. Then the doors opened again. The man entered late. Not rushed. Not apologetic. He stepped inside as if he had every right to interrupt the flow of the room. His suit was immaculate, dark, perfectly tailored. His shoes reflected the overhead lights like polished glass. His posture was straight, shoulders squared, chin lifted just enough to suggest confidence without effort. His presence didn't ask for attention. It expected it. Conversations softened. A few heads turned. A bailiff adjusted his stance without realizing why. Even people who didn't recognize the man felt something shift in the air, like pressure before a storm. When his name was called, he didn't respond immediately. He waited. Then he walked forward slowly, deliberately, as though the courtroom existed around him, not above him. Judge Jonathan Steele looked up. He didn't react. No surprise. No irritation. Just calm, neutral observation. The clerk read the charge aloud. A routine traffic violation. Failure to yield at a pedestrian crosswalk. Simple. Ordinary. The kind of case handled in minutes. A warning, a fine, maybe a brief lecture about safety, and then on to the next name. Judge Steele began to speak. The man interrupted him. Not loudly. Not aggressively. Quietly. Clearly. With certainty. "Let's not waste time," he said. "You can't touch me. I'm the FBI director." For a moment, the courtroom forgot how to breathe. A ripple of disbelief moved through the benches. A few gasps escaped before people could stop themselves. Someone laughed nervously, convinced it had to be a joke, some kind of misunderstanding. It wasn't. The man continued speaking, as if this were the most obvious thing in the world. He explained that he'd been late for an urgent federal meeting. That the bus driver who reported the incident had exaggerated. That his position made the charge irrelevant. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He dismissed. Judge Steele paused. Not offended. Not impressed. He studied the man for a moment, then asked a single question. "Sir," he said evenly, "do you believe your title places you above the law?" The man smiled. Not cruelly. Not mockingly. Confidently. He replied that federal authority outranked municipal courts. That internal processes existed for situations like this. That this would be handled internally. In other words, the court didn't need to concern itself. Judge Steele nodded slowly. "Let's hear from the witness," he said. The bus driver was called to the stand. He stood up carefully, like someone used to long hours on his feet. Middle-aged. Broad shoulders softened by time. Hands rough from years of gripping a steering wheel, opening doors, working shifts that started before sunrise. He looked nervous. Not because he didn't know the truth, but because he knew who he was standing across from. He described the intersection. The crosswalk markings. Pedestrians stepping forward, trusting the signal. The official vehicle approaching faster than expected. Slowing, but not stopping. He explained how he'd hit his brakes harder than usual. How close it had felt. Judge Steele listened without interruption. Then he asked, "Did anything else happen?" The bus driver hesitated. His eyes flicked briefly toward the man in the suit. His fingers tightened against the edge of the stand. "Yes, Your Honor," he said quietly. He explained that after reporting the incident, he'd received a phone call the night before court. The number was blocked. The voice on the other end was calm, polite, almost friendly. The caller didn't threaten him, didn't yell. Instead, the voice reminded him who he was up against. Mentioned titles, careers, consequences. Suggested, gently, that it would be wise to forget what he thought he saw. Just a reminder. The courtroom went silent. Judge Steele leaned forward slightly. "Contacted how?" he asked. The bus driver swallowed. "By phone, sir. A private call." Judge Steele's expression changed. Not anger. Alertness. He straightened in his chair and looked directly at the man in the suit. "Sir," he said slowly, carefully, so every word landed where it needed to, "this court does not appreciate intimidation." The man shifted his weight. Just slightly. And in that moment, everyone in the room understood the same thing. This was no longer a simple traffic case. This was the moment when power had walked into the wrong room. The courtroom did not return to normal after that moment. There was no casual shifting in seats. No quiet murmurs. No nervous coughing. The air tightened, like the room itself understood something irreversible had just been introduced. Judge Jonathan Steele sat still, his hands folded lightly in front of him. His eyes moved once, back to the bus driver. "Tell the court about the call," he said. The bus driver nodded slowly. His voice was steady, but his hands weren't. He explained the timing first. Late evening. After dinner. After he'd already tried to calm his nerves about the hearing the next day. The tone of the caller wasn't angry. That was the part that bothered him most. The voice was controlled. Professional. Almost rehearsed. Like someone who had made calls like this before. The caller didn't say the word threat, but the message was clear enough. You don't want trouble. You don't want attention. You don't want to be remembered. The driver told the court that when the call ended, he sat in silence for a long time, staring at his phone, wondering if doing the right thing was worth the cost. Before Judge Steele could respond, the defendant spoke. "This is absurd," he said sharply. "People invent stories when they feel small next to authority." His voice carried irritation now. The calm certainty from earlier was thinning. Judge Steele raised one hand. The interruption stopped instantly. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was heavy, pressurized. Like everyone was waiting for something to snap. "Let's review the footage," the judge said. The defendant leaned back slightly in his chair. A smirk crossed his face. He believed this would end things. The courtroom lights dimmed as the screen flickered on. Security footage from the intersection filled the room. The video played without sound. The official vehicle entered the frame. It slowed, but didn't stop. Pedestrians hesitated at the curb, unsure. One took a step back. The bus appeared, braking harder than expected, its front end dipping slightly under the sudden stop. Nothing dramatic. No collision. But something important was there. A moment where harm could have happened. Judge Steele narrated calmly, his voice steady and precise. The vehicle approaches the crosswalk. The pedestrians have the right of way. The bus responds defensively. The video ended. No commentary followed. Then Judge Steele spoke again. "Play the next clip." The clerk hesitated for half a second, just long enough for confusion to ripple through the room, then complied. A new video appeared. Courthouse hallway footage. Time-stamped. The evening before. The defendant was clearly visible, pacing near the wall, phone pressed to his ear. His stride was tight, purposeful. His free hand gestured as he spoke, fingers slicing the air. The timestamp appeared in the corner. Minutes after the bus driver had left the building following a pre-trial conference. The smirk vanished. The defendant's jaw tightened. Judge Steele let the clip play for several seconds longer than necessary. Then he turned back to the defendant. "Sir," he asked evenly, "do you recognize that call?" The defendant didn't answer. Instead, he objected. Procedural language spilled out, jurisdiction, relevance, authority. He spoke faster now, layering arguments on top of one another, as if volume and complexity could bury the question. Judge Steele listened. He didn't interrupt. When the defendant finished, the judge leaned forward slightly. "Authority," he said calmly, "explains responsibility. It does not erase it." He explained to the courtroom that intimidation of a witness was not protected by rank, that federal titles did not grant immunity in state courts, that the law did not look only at individual actions, but at patterns. And patterns, he said, leave fingerprints. The room shifted. People stopped whispering. Phones came out quietly. Even those who had come for unrelated cases leaned forward, suddenly aware they were witnessing something rare. The bus driver's shoulders shook slightly. Not from fear. From relief. Judge Steele turned to the clerk. "Has the subpoena request for phone records been processed?" "Yes, Your Honor," the clerk replied. The defendant stood up. "You're overstepping," he said, his voice raised now. The certainty was gone, replaced by urgency. Judge Steele looked at him. "No, sir," he replied evenly. "You are." The clerk received a message. "Read it." Froze. Then looked up. "The call," the clerk said slowly, "originated from a government-issued device registered to the defendant's office." The courtroom erupted. Gasps, whispers, stunned disbelief. Judge Steele removed his glasses. "This court," he said, "will take a brief recess." And just like that, power began to unravel. Silence settled over the courtroom during recess. Not the empty kind, but the kind that hums. People didn't leave their seats. They leaned toward one another, whispering just enough to avoid drawing attention. Word spread quietly through the building, carried by clerks, bailiffs, and defendants who had come for completely different reasons and now found themselves part of something far bigger. Security stood differently now. Not deferential. Not tense. Professional. When Judge Jonathan Steele returned, the room rose. He didn't sit right away. He looked out over the courtroom, letting the silence finish its work. Then he spoke. "This court," he said calmly, "does not exist to display power." His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It does not exist to punish for the sake of punishment. And it does not exist to make examples of people because of who they are. He paused. It exists for fairness. The words settled slowly. The law, he continued, only works when people believe it applies to everyone. Not most people. Not convenient people. Everyone. Only then did he turn toward the defendant. The man who had walked uncertain. The man who had smiled when he said, "You can't touch me." Judge Steele's tone didn't change, but the meaning did. "Witness intimidation," he said, "changes everything." He explained that what began as a routine traffic violation had crossed a line. That once pressure entered the equation, the issue was no longer about a crosswalk. It was about integrity. He reached for the phone. The movement was unhurried, deliberate. The room understood something irreversible was happening. No cameras flashed. No voices rose. No drama filled the air. Judge Steele made one call. Not to the media. Not for spectacle. To the appropriate oversight authority. He spoke plainly. Precisely. He listed facts. Timelines. Evidence. Nothing more. Nothing less. The call lasted less than 2 minutes. When he hung up, the room felt different, lighter, somehow, as though the weight of uncertainty had finally found somewhere to land. "This matter," Judge Steele said, "is no longer about fines or points on a license." He looked directly at the defendant. "It is being referred for further investigation." For the first time since entering the courtroom, the man looked uncertain. His suit was still perfect. His posture still upright. But the confidence, the armor, was gone. Judge Steele addressed him one final time. "Your title," he said evenly, "demanded respect." He paused. "Your actions forfeited it." The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. The judge turned to the bus driver. "You did the right thing," he said. "You are dismissed." "Thank you." The man stood slowly. Relief washed over his face, real, unguarded. As he stepped away from the stand, quiet applause spread through the courtroom. Judge Steele didn't stop it. He didn't encourage it either. He simply allowed it. As officers approached the defendant, not arresting him, not accusing, just escorting him with calm professionalism, Judge Steele delivered the final line. "In this courtroom," he said, "everyone stops at the crosswalk." Outside the courthouse, people gathered. Phones buzzed. Conversations overlapped. Headlines began forming in real time. Some spoke with anger. Some with disbelief. Others with something closer to hope. Trust had been shaken, but not destroyed. Justice hadn't shouted. It hadn't chased power. It had stood still and waited for the truth to catch up. And when it did, titles stepped aside. The law remained.